During the spring of the previous year, reports surfaced from livestock owners near the German-Dutch border, particularly in the eastern Dutch regions and the far south of the country. These farmers recounted several incidents where their sheep, and on occasion, even their herding dogs, were slaughtered but left uneaten. The news covered these occurrences multiple times. If the culprits were wolves, as many assumed, they exhibited highly unusual behavior. Wolves typically do not kill without consuming their prey, nor do they normally engage in combat with trained sheepdogs. Moreover, they avoid human-occupied areas, especially when deterrents like electric fences and guard dogs are present. Despite this, instances of livestock and sheepdogs being attacked and, at times, partially eaten persisted. In the southeast, 11 sheep, including 6 lambs, were found dead, their bodies left untouched apart from deep bite wounds on their throats. No trace of the attacker remained, except for a single paw print measuring roughly 7 inches in length. After these events, there was a period of quiet. Then, fresh reports from the eastern region confirmed wolf involvement in the livestock deaths, with DNA tests from bite marks supporting this conclusion. Roughly a year later, a small wolf pack had settled in the largest Dutch national park, Veluwe, and reports of sheep being attacked seemingly stopped, or at least, they were no longer making headlines. The perpetrator of the 11 deaths in the southeast was also officially deemed a wolf, though this claim lacked supporting DNA evidence. Some suggested that young wolves, in search of territory, might kill farm animals to establish dominance over other wolves. However, this contradicted the widely accepted belief that wolves avoid human settlements, particularly those guarded by trained dogs and electrified enclosures. The entire situation remained shrouded in mystery. I had a deep love for exploring the woods at dusk and often did so multiple times a year. Despite the legal restriction on entering forests after dark or before sunrise, I frequently took evening walks, slipping into the trees just before sundown and departing when darkness fully set in. Wearing dark clothing, I avoided drawing attention from park rangers or unsavory individuals. I never quite understood why I was drawn to these nocturnal hikes, but I felt an almost instinctual pull toward the wilderness ever since my first off-trail venture in the summer of 2017. No matter the time of day, stepping into the woods filled me with excitement and energy. On rare occasions, I even felt a primal urge to hunt when spotting deer or rabbits, though I neither had the means nor the legal right to do so. A few weeks prior to writing this, at the beginning of autumn, I embarked on another nighttime walk in the forest. Since the weather was overcast and drizzly, I carried a flashlight. As usual, I arrived by mountain bike, securing it to a metal post before venturing deeper into the woodland. On my way in, I passed the last remaining visitors who were heading toward their vehicles and homes. The deeper I walked, the darker my surroundings became until I reached the heart of the forest, where I immersed myself in the crisp air, the sense of damp earth, and the sounds of rustling leaves. As I sat on a wooden bench, I faintly heard distressed bleating coming from approximately 200 meters away. Curious and slightly concerned, I got up and walked toward the source. The sheep sounded panicked, as if fleeing from something. I was surprised that their cries carried so far, but even more baffled that I could distinctly smell them on the wind. It was common for shepherds to move their flocks around the forest to manage plant growth. One day, the sheep might be grazing near a lake, and the next, they would be stationed on the moor. Tonight, they were gathered on a small clearing, encircled by a temporary low electric fence meant to keep them contained. As I approached, I saw the animals running frantically, clearly terrified. What shocked me more was the sight of 2 dead sheep lying in pools of blood, their throats brutally torn open. The wounds appeared too large to have been caused by a dog or even a typical wolf. Oddly, the fence remained intact, undisturbed. However, I noticed massive canine-like paw prints scattered around the site, as if the predator had circled its prey before striking. Rather than feeling fear, I felt irritated, angered, even by the intrusion into what I considered my second home. Ignoring my better judgment, I chose to follow the tracks. My curiosity outweighed my caution, and I was determined to uncover the identity of the creature responsible. In hindsight, I may have been marching straight into danger. The deeper I went, the harder it became to see. The trees thickened, blocking out what little light remained. Eventually, I conceded that continuing was unwise. As I stood still, the distant sounds of distressed sheep still echoed behind me, roughly 55 meters away. Then, something changed. The air carried a new scent, a mix of wet fur and fresh blood. My body tensed when I heard measured footsteps crunching through the leaves. Something was approaching. I aimed my flashlight toward the source of the sound. Reflecting back at me were golden yellow eyes, roughly 4 feet above the ground. Whatever stood before me was bigger than a wolf, bigger than any dog I'd ever seen. My breath caught as the beast stepped closer, revealing its form. It resembled a wolf, but its proportions were wrong. Its frame was bulkier, sturdier. Dark fur covered its back, fading to a lighter shade on its underside. A short, bristly mane lined its neck. Blood smeared its snout, confirming that it had slaughtered the sheep. Fear settled in. I knew any sudden movement could be fatal. The creature inched forward, stopping 5 meters away. As I stood frozen in awe, it did something unnatural. It rose onto 2 legs, now towering over me at 7 feet. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to remain still, adopting a defensive stance. The beast sniffed the air, its ears twitching as if assessing me. I recalled that appearing larger could sometimes deter an attack, though no trick would make me seem bigger than this thing. Then, defying all logic, I spoke. Mustering every ounce of confidence, I commanded, "This is my forest. Leave." To my disbelief, the creature reacted. Stepped back, breaking eye contact. I took a single step forward, acting as if I had the upper hand. In response, it let out a low growl, one that almost resembled reluctant compliance. It then dropped back onto all 4s, turned away, and retreated into the shadows. Just before disappearing, it glanced back at me, its expression eerily human-like, before vanishing. As soon as I could no longer hear or see the creature, my body released the tension I hadn't realized I was holding. My breath escaped in a shaky sigh, and then the fear hit me in full force. I shivered violently as a distant, haunting howl echoed through the trees. The sound sent ice through my veins. Wasting no time, I turned and hastened back to my bike, paranoia keeping me on edge at every noise. The moment I reached it, I unlocked it and pedaled home as fast as possible. Once safely inside, the reality of my encounter crashed down on me. I could have been killed. Why hadn't it attacked me? What had it smelled that made it hesitate? Even stranger, I never heard a word about the slaughtered sheep on the news. It was as if the event had been erased. One thing was certain, I would not be venturing into those woods at night ever again. If I did, I might not be so lucky next time. I've been hiking these mountains for years now. I'm a 36-year-old guy, kind of obsessed with fitness and staying active. It all started back in high school when I struggled with my weight. I had been an overweight teenager, but growing up in the countryside, I found hiking and camping with my dad was the perfect way to get in shape. Within a year, I had shed the extra pounds, but I couldn't stop. I had fallen in love with the outdoors. Nothing else compared. The rush of being out in the wild became addictive. A month after I turned 26, my dad lost his battle with cancer. That's when hiking really became more than a hobby. It was a way of life. It was the thing that had bonded us the most, and after he was gone, it felt like the only way to stay connected to him. But I'm not here to tell you a sad story. I'm here to tell you that something is seriously wrong with the deer in the Appalachian region. As of October 2022, this area is prime hunting ground, so the deer around here are usually skittish. They'll bolt before you even realize they're there. But lately, I've been stumbling upon them, like they don't even notice me until I'm right next to them. And then it got even stranger. This happened on a solo camping trip on October 8th. I had packed up my campsite early that morning and hit the trail. Not even half an hour later, I nearly jumped out of my skin when I looked up and saw a massive buck standing right in the middle of the trail where there had been nothing before. It was snorting, pawing at the dirt, and acting aggressive. I figured it just hadn't noticed me yet, so I shouted to scare it off. But instead of reacting, it just stopped moving entirely. It didn't even look at me. I tried again, louder this time. Nothing. The buck didn't even twitch an ear. This thing was huge and its antlers were impressive, but curiosity got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I reached out and touched its side. Stupid, I know, but the strangest part? Still didn't react. My hand landed just beneath its ribs, and that's when I felt it. Something moving under its skin. Something slithering. Felt like thick, writhing snakes. At first, I thought the poor thing had some kind of parasite, but I quickly realized there aren't any worms that big in nature. For a second, I wondered if its organs were shifting unnaturally, but that didn't make sense either. Then the thought hit me, what if this was some sort of disease? Maybe something like chronic wasting disease, but worse. I jerked my hand back, cursing myself for touching it. Who knew what kind of sickness it had? I dug into my bag with my other hand and doused my palm with hand sanitizer, scrubbing hard. When I looked back up, the buck's face was inches from mine. Its mouth was wide open, and a deep, nearly inaudible growl rumbled from its throat. Its breath reeked of death. Inside its mouth, tumor-like growths covered its tongue and throat, the flesh dark gray, almost black. I realized its body hadn't moved, just its head, bent unnaturally to bring its face close to mine, as if its neck had twisted out of place. I scrambled backward, heart pounding, and ran up the trail, stealing glances over my shoulder. But the buck didn't move. It never moved again for as long as I could still see it. I walked for hours, pushing past exhaustion. I skipped my second planned campsite, aiming for the third instead. I wanted as much distance as possible between me and that deer. Even after stopping for short breaks, my legs ached by the time I reached my destination. The rest of the evening was peaceful. I ate some granola bars, drank more water than I needed, and watched the sun dip behind the mountains. Not long after, I crawled into my tent, barely able to keep my eyes open. I don't know how long I was asleep before I woke up. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunched outside my tent. Even through the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves, I could hear them, heavy yet graceful. The fire's embers still glowed, casting a faint shadow against my tent as something moved between the light and me. A deer. This time it was a doe. I watched her silhouette step deeper into my campsite, closer to the tent. There was something unsettling about the way she moved. Her steps were too methodical, her hooves placed too precisely, like she was following a script. Her ears didn't twitch. Her head didn't jerk around. She simply stopped. I held my breath, waiting. She remained perfectly still. Then her head turned. I couldn't tell if she was looking at me, but something told me she was. A low, guttural growl filled the night, the same sound the buck had made. Only this time it was louder. Then came the sound of something wet hitting the ground. Heavy, solid. I barely had time to process what I just heard before I felt something slither against my right arm. I shot up, cursing, and looked down. A thick, worm-like bulge shifted beneath the tent floor, squirming its way outside before disappearing into the darkness. I sat frozen, my skin crawling with horror. I didn't need anyone to tell me what had just happened. I already knew. The things writhing inside the deer had finally come out. The doe stood outside my tent all night. I stayed awake, too terrified to move. Eventually, exhaustion won and I passed out. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the trees. Slowly, I unzipped the tent. The doe was dead. Her body was stiff, legs stretched straight. Her eyes were gone, and her belly was eerily hollow, as if something had emptied her from the inside. No blood, no entrails, just an impossibly thin, dry husk. I packed up quickly, shoving my tent into a trash bag. Whatever had slithered near me had touched it, and I wasn't taking any chances. I planned to burn it the moment I got home. The hike back to my truck was easy. No strange encounters. No deer watching me. The truck started fine. No monsters lurking in the back seat. I just drove home. When I called my mom to tell her about it, I forced a laugh. Pretended it was just some wild story, but I haven't gone back to that region since. Nowadays, I stick to trails far from the Appalachians. the extra travel time is worth it. Because whatever's happening to the deer there, I don't want to find out. My spouse and I moved into our camper van last autumn, with our first destination being a visit to relatives in West Texas before heading to Arizona for a music festival. Once the festival wrapped up, we lingered in Tucson for a while to check out the Gem and Mineral Show before making our way north toward Flagstaff and then the Grand Canyon. On our way there, we stumbled upon an incredible remote camping spot in the Coconino National Forest. It was along a small Forest Service road that only had 2 campsites. One was already taken by a man and his young son, who I guessed had spent their day in Sedona, about 45 minutes away, before returning to their RV. We managed to grab the last available site just before crossing the area, and it was fantastic. The site sat atop a small hill that had been leveled, offering a stunning view of the surrounding mountain ranges. A ranch fence stretched beside us, and beyond the next mountain in the valley, a ranch lay hidden. Wild cattle roamed the area, adding to the breathtaking scenery. I spent hours just gazing at the landscape. It was an incredibly secluded spot, which suited us perfectly since we love both stargazing and solitude. We tend to go to bed early, around sunset, waking up near sunrise with a brief middle-of-the-night trip outside. That night, when we stepped out for a bathroom break, we were awestruck by the brilliance of the stars. They were absolutely dazzling. After taking in the sight, we returned to bed, agreeing to stay another night just to experience the starlit sky again. The next day was spent listening to music, relaxing, and soaking in the landscape. At one point, I kept noticing a bright, strobe-like light on a distant ridge. I mentioned it to my husband, but by the time he looked, it was gone. I dismissed it at first, but after spotting it multiple times, concern crept in. As someone trained in wilderness first aid, I wondered if a stranded hiker was signaling for help. However, the light kept appearing in different locations, far too quickly for someone to be moving on foot or bicycle. That evening, after dinner, we sat outside watching the sunset before retreating into the van as darkness fell. Once the sky was fully dark, we stepped out again around 10 or 11 p.m. to admire the stars. Immediately, I spotted an incredibly bright white light overhead. I asked if it was the North Star, but it seemed too close and too intense. My husband wasn't sure. We wandered around, observing the sky and watching satellites pass by. When we returned to our original spot, the light had vanished. Then we saw it again, but now it was further away and changing colors. It moved rapidly, almost like a hummingbird, shifting between yellow, red, and blue hues. I've witnessed many unusual celestial events, so at first, I wasn't too alarmed. It reminded me of the mysterious lights we had seen in Marfa, which moved more fluidly. But that sense of calm quickly faded when the light's colors shifted to deep violet and blue, with flashes of magenta. It was strangely mesmerizing, almost soothing. Then it started moving closer, cycling through blues, purples, pinks, and greens. Suddenly, it descended to ground level, just beyond a large juniper tree near our campsite. I held my breath. The tree was so close. That's when we realized the light was watching us, peeking around the juniper just as we had been peeking around our van. It moved in an almost playful, curious manner, like a child observing something new. The light seemed to hover where a face would be, and it was about the height of an average man. A sudden realization struck me. We were about to truly see it. A deep fear settled in because I didn't know if I was ready for that. It felt like standing on the brink of uncovering a massive truth, one that, once known, couldn't be forgotten. My body tensed. Maybe I made a noise or stepped back, but whatever I did, the light reacted immediately. It dropped low to the ground, shifting its stance like a predator observing through the underbrush. Then, its glow turned an intense, pulsing red, the color of aggression. Panic gripped me. We bolted for the van, slamming the doors shut and locking them. Thankfully, we had insulated bubble wrap covering the windows, which kept us from seeing out, but more importantly, kept whatever was out there from seeing in. At that moment, I was grateful for it. My heart pounded, and I struggled to catch my breath. After some time, we gathered enough courage to take another look. When we stepped outside, the area where the light had been was now empty. Relief washed over me, but doubt crept in too. Had we imagined it? Then, my gaze shifted toward the ranch fence. Beyond it, several similar lights were moving back and forth, glowing in shades of green and blue. They were distant enough that I didn't feel the same overwhelming fear, but they were still there. For some reason, I turned toward the ridge I had been watching earlier that day. A large, dark shape appeared to be moving. I told myself it was just my imagination, but at that exact moment, a bright light switched on. Only this wasn't just a light, it was something else entirely. What I saw resembled a robotic entity, something straight out of science fiction. It was massive and unmistakably mechanical. The figure shone a beam into the valley, illuminating the area where we had just seen the green and blue lights. It flickered a few times and then disappeared. Within moments, the smaller lights vanished as well, and they did not return for the rest of the night. We hadn't even thought to grab our phones to record what happened. It all unfolded too quickly. Looking back, I wish we had, but something about the moment made it feel like recording wasn't even an option. Later, when I reviewed the photos I had taken earlier in the trip, there were strange anomalies in them, subtle but there. A few years back, I spent my summers working for a vacation lodge. During my free time, I would go on hikes, set up camp, and explore the rugged landscape. My job was at a resort near the Colorado River, an area surrounded by undiscovered canyons and ancient ruins. One late afternoon, after venturing through secluded beaches and deep water-filled craters, I was driving back to the dorms provided for temporary employees without RVs. The area around the resort was arid, with endless stretches of dry brush and sparse vegetation. Some parts were designated for ranching, and it was common to see cowboys herding cattle on horseback. As I made my way back, I noticed something unusual on my right, a cluster of flickering lights in the distance. They resembled campfires, but during this season, outdoor fires weren't allowed. My curiosity got the best of me, so I pulled over. The road was completely deserted, and there were no streetlights for miles. I turned off the engine and focused on the lights. I had always been fascinated by the legends passed down by indigenous tribes about spirits and unexplained desert phenomena. Despite that, I felt no fear, only curiosity. At first, I assumed they were just ordinary campfires. But as I continued watching, something felt off. The lights weren't still, they shifted. Feeling like an intruder, I crossed the road for a better look. There were no voices, no crackling firewood, none of the usual sounds you'd expect from a campsite. As I observed more closely, I realized the lights weren't touching the ground. They hovered at least 4 feet above it. A chill ran through me as old stories of ghostly lights filled my mind. A warning echoed in my head, "Don't follow them." But before I could process it, my body started moving forward on its own. My boots sank into the sand as I walked toward the lights, a strange force pulling me in. Though I was fully conscious, it felt as though I had lost control. As I got closer, the lights reacted to my presence. They turned and floated deeper into the desert. When I reached the area where they had just been, the atmosphere felt warm and peaceful. Around me lay scattered debris, remnants of what seemed to be a long-forgotten home. As I reached the center of the clearing, my legs locked in place. The lights vanished in an instant. Suddenly, the air turned icy, and the wind picked up sharply. This wasn't the normal nighttime desert chill. It felt unnatural. A heavy sensation settled over me, as though I was trespassing on sacred ground. Scanning the area, I noticed a faint trail leading away. Instinct told me it was my best escape route. Before leaving, I hesitated, sensing unseen eyes watching me. The lights reappeared in the distance, hovering hesitantly as if waiting for me to go. Feeling guilty, I softly apologized, promising not to return unless welcomed. The lights blinked, once, then again, slower this time. It didn't feel like an invitation. Taking that as my cue, I retraced my steps back to my car. Just as I opened the door, something tapped the window. a firm but gentle slap. I turned back toward the clearing. The lights had reformed into the shape of people gathered around a fire, but I knew for certain there had been no one there before. This time, there was no hostility, only a quiet longing to be left undisturbed. Whispering a small prayer, I drove away. The following day, I convinced a few coworkers to revisit the spot with me. When we arrived, we only found the remains of an old structure and fragments of clay pottery. That same feeling of being unwelcome returned, so we didn't linger. As we walked away, a sudden gust of wind swept through the area, carrying what sounded like a soft thank you on the breeze. During my time by the Colorado River, I experienced many unexplained events, most tied to stories shared by the local tribes, but I never sought out answers. Some mysteries, I figured, were best left alone. This happened to me during the lockdown the previous year. I've actually had a strange encounter with some kind of creature before. It was June when this event took place, right after school ended. I'm currently 18, and at the time I was 17. By late May and early June, we had completed all our school assignments. If there was nothing left to do, we didn't have to attend school. My friends and I were really into fishing since it was one of the only activities we were allowed to do. Every morning at around 6 a.m., 6 of us would wake up. One of us would drive around picking up the others since we all lived nearby. We always went to the same large pond to fish for bass and trout. It was great, especially with a bait shop only a couple of minutes away. On the last day of school, we decided to try a different location. We all had an app that helped us find fishing spots. We found a place that seemed perfect for trout. There were several areas listed where people had caught rainbow and brook trout, and rarely some brown trout. It was about a 30-minute drive, and we all agreed to check it out. My friend Jake picked us up, and we made the 30-minute trip. To reach the fishing spots, we had to hike a 4-mile trail. We arrived at about 6:30 a.m., unpacked our gear, and started the hike. I enjoy fly fishing, so I brought my fly rod for small trout in shallow water and my standard rod for deeper holes where bigger fish might be lurking. After about 10 minutes, we reached the first fishing spot. It was small, only big enough for 3 people at a time. We split into 2 groups. My 2 friends, Alex and Ryan, and I formed one group, while our other 3 friends, Mark, Jake, and Owen, went separately. We planned to meet back at the start of the trail at noon. The spot we chose had a few rainbow trout swimming in the stream, perfect for fly fishing. My friend waded a little further out to where there was a deeper hole with a large trout and a few sunfish. I kept getting small bites but no solid catches. Then, about 20 minutes later, I heard something rustling near us. Alex and Ryan were joking around, trying to catch a trout, so I assumed it was a deer and continued fishing. But the sound grew louder. This time, Alex and Ryan noticed it too and stopped talking. It didn't sound like a deer. It was deeper, heavier, almost like a bear. We decided to move on to another fishing spot. We had been walking for about 5, maybe 10 minutes when Alex suddenly stopped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. We all went quiet, straining to listen. There it was, someone speaking softly. Then the voice got louder. Moments later, I heard something mimicking my friend Mark's voice. "Guys, come here. Jake got hurt." That wasn't Mark. It sounded off, too rough, too unnatural. We called Mark's phone to check where they were. He answered right away. "Where are you guys?" we asked. Mark's reply sent chills through me, despite the warm 70-degree weather. "We're about 20 minutes away at a little fishing hole. Just caught a smallmouth bass. What about you guys?" I hung up and turned to face the direction where we had heard the voice. A deep, raspy, guttural growl echoed through the trees. It reminded me of that scene from South Park where Randy Marsh says, "I'm so startled." I quickly texted Mark, telling him to stay put. We were coming to him right away. We picked up our pace, hiking as fast as possible. About 5 minutes later, we heard it again. This time, the voice mimicked Owen's. "Guys, Mark twisted his ankle. We need help." That wasn't Owen. We knew it. Ignoring the voice, we kept moving. We finally reached our friends and told them what had happened. Without hesitation, We grabbed our gear and left the mountain as fast as possible. On the drive back home, we tried to figure out what it could have been, but no one had a clear answer. If anyone has any ideas, I'd love to hear them. My father and I, let's call him D for the story, had planned to meet up with my nephew T and my older brother J for a weekend of hiking and camping along a section of a well-known mountain trail near Asheville, North Carolina. The drive there was going to take us nearly 8 hours, so we planned to leave around 7 in the morning to ensure we had enough daylight to trek a good distance down the path. For the record, when it comes to being on time, my dad is not the most reliable person. He's a great guy, but he always has some excuse for running ridiculously late. He'll crack jokes about it, expecting you to laugh it off, but gets defensive if you don't find it amusing. I can't even recall what his excuse was this time, but he didn't show up at my apartment until nearly 10 a.m. He honked his horn repeatedly as he pulled into the parking lot, making a scene as if I were the one delaying us. I was furious. Few things annoy me more than someone leaning on their horn like a lunatic instead of simply coming to the door. The entire drive to meet up with J and T, I barely spoke a word to him. He, on the other hand, was goofing off trying to lighten my mood, though I wasn't in the mood for his antics. To top it off, we stopped a few times at rest areas to grab snacks, and every time we got back in the car, he'd start smoking. He knew I couldn't stand it, but he did what he wanted, regardless of how others felt. By noon, when we were supposed to be meeting J and T, they began messaging me, wondering where we were. I told them D had been late picking me up, so we likely wouldn't arrive until around 6. They were frustrated too. By the time we finally pulled into the lot where we'd leave our vehicles, the sky was already turning shades of orange. This particular section of the trail had an optional loop we planned to take on our way back. Just as we parked, a cold, misty rain started falling. Not a heavy downpour, but just enough to be irritating. We should have already reached our camping spot by then. J and T gave my dad a hard time about his tardiness, which only made him move even slower while getting his gear together. By the time we actually began our trek, we had to use the headlamps we'd packed just to see where we were going beneath the dense canopy. For those unfamiliar, flashlights and headlamps don't provide much help in a pitch-black forest. You might be able to see a short distance ahead, maybe 20 feet if you're lucky. With the rain picking up about an hour into the hike, visibility shrank to barely 5 to 10 feet. We were miserable. To keep our spirits up and hopefully keep bears at bay, Jay suggested we start singing. So we did, belting out old tunes. None of us could sing worth a damn, and we probably sounded awful. At one point, Jay tripped while crossing a creek in the darkness, completely smashing his smartwatch, which he had received from a company event. The screen was in pieces. At this point, we just wanted to find a decent place to set up our hammocks and get some rest. However, since we were carrying food, we had to reach one of the designated sites with bare cables to hoist our packs out of reach. That meant we had no choice but to press on. Finally, in near total darkness and a now light drizzle, we made it. I had lost all sense of time by then, but I'd guess it was sometime between midnight and 1 a.m. We unpacked our hammocks and rain covers, then secured our gear to the bare cables. If that's not the proper term, it shows how inexperienced I was with long-distance hiking. This was the first trip like this for any of us, except Jay. We picked a small hill with enough trees to hang our hammocks in a row. It was slightly off the main trail in a clearing. Let me tell you, if you've never set up a hammock on an incline, don't. It's a terrible idea, but we had little choice. Once everything was in place, we said goodnight and settled in. I was dozing off when I suddenly had the eerie feeling of being watched. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was just my nerves adjusting to the unfamiliar surroundings. The forest was making its usual noises, crickets, distant rustling. So I told myself everything was fine and attempted to sleep. Just as I closed my eyes, I heard a voice, a woman's voice. It whispered in my ear, softly but clearly, "Come with me." The voice had a strange, almost otherworldly quality to it. Spoke my name, and it sounded so close, like someone was leaning right next to my ear, whispering a secret, but I felt no breath. Panic surged through me. I snapped on my headlamp, scanning the area. Nothing. The forest had gone silent. No rustling, no chirping, just dead quiet. I didn't dare leave my hammock, though I knew it offered no real protection. Instead, I gripped my knife and sat up, clutching it across my chest. The voice came again and again. Each time, it whispered my name, urging me to follow. But there were no footsteps, no movement through the fallen autumn leaves, no swaying branches. Just that voice right by my ear calling me. Each time I heard it, my skin prickled and my heart pounded. I was fully awake, yet I couldn't bring myself to move. I stayed like that, gripping my knife, unable to sleep, until finally, the sounds of the forest returned. Only then did the voice stop. I'm not blind to the fact that there are strange things in this world. One of the few possibilities I could think of was some kind of spirit or entity, maybe something ancient from the land. My family, however, doesn't believe in anything supernatural unless it's mentioned in scripture. As we packed up in the morning and continued our hike, I let Jay fall back with me for a moment. I asked him if he had heard anything unusual the night before. He didn't answer right away, but I could see the color drain from his face. The worst part? We still had 2 more nights in the wilderness. Luckily, we started out much earlier that day, again, despite my dad's delays. That night, we set up our hammocks in a circle rather than in a straight line. The whispers never returned, nor did they come the next night. By then, all we had left was the tough hike back to the car. This was, without a doubt, one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of my life, and if I have any say in the matter, my last overnight hiking trip. Was it really a bird from Crimson? The northeastern region of the United States carries a deep history. This isn't something often talked about, but folks around here understand that the forests can have an uneasy feeling. If anyone has any thoughts on what I'm about to share, I'd be grateful to hear them. This took place roughly a decade ago on a bright afternoon. I was out walking my dog along a quiet country road near my home, one we'd wandered many times before. That's when I heard an odd bird call, coming from just beyond the trees. As I kept moving, the sound came again and again, always seeming to stay just out of view. It annoyed me because I had never heard a bird quite like this before, and I was eager to catch sight of it. No matter how closely I searched the branches or undergrowth, I saw no motion, even though the calls kept shifting to different spots. When I reached the bridge spanning a narrow creek, I turned back toward home. There weren't any proper houses in this stretch of road, just the remnants of an old mill from 2 centuries ago and a crumbling house so ancient it still had an outhouse. The bird calls continued with an almost maddening consistency. Eventually, I grew so irritated that I stepped off the road, determined to find the source. But each time I moved forward a little, the sound seemed to shift a bit deeper into the forest. How was I not catching even a glimpse of it? Then something changed. The world snapped back into focus, like I had been in some kind of daze. I realized I was about 30 feet into the woods, and everything around me had gone unsettlingly quiet. Why was I even doing this? The only sound left was that peculiar bird call. How could a bird move nearly 15 feet so fast without making a single rustling sound? My determination faded, replaced by a sickening sense of dread. My instincts screamed that I had made a mistake. I turned and walked back toward the road as casually as I could, then continued home. The bird calls trailed after me until I had left that abandoned property behind. I tried walking my dog down that road a few more times, but whenever I heard those calls, my stomach twisted with an unshakable unease. It sounds ridiculous, but it felt like something was mocking me. My dog never seemed disturbed, so maybe it was just in my head. Enough time has passed that I can't clearly describe the sound anymore, but something tells me that if I ever heard it again, I'd know instantly. I spent hours listening to bird recordings online, but I never found a match.